Okay, welcome everybody to our Designing and Technology Enhanced Programs Reflected session. For those that are new to Future Teacher, this will be the third time we're running this particular topic. And on the same website that I'm sharing my screen with now and that you registered via, you'll find the list of all the previous webinars and topics that we've covered, along with all the resources and recordings that we've used for those. So you can read some information about the project and so on in your own time. The top of the page for today's session, you'll find a little panel that you can expand to read a little bit about it, but then also about us, the host for today, and then a panel for each of our guest speakers who will introduce themselves or be introduced and then talk about their projects. But if we've got a link to a presentation, then you'll be able to access that there either during or after the session. So, and you've got social media contact details and so on. As I scroll down the page here, you'll see there's the previous recordings and also the main resource that we used a couple of years ago. We've kind of stopped populating those, but there's still a rich source of content and resources from the previous run-ins of the sessions. I've lost track now who was going to summarize what people said they want to learn. I think it's Rosemary, isn't it?
It is me today. So we've got quite a range of things that folk are interested in today. Starting with, what does a good, inclusive, flexible and engaging course look like? And looking for some top tips and detail on that, particularly things like focusing on getting the human into online learning. Quite a few people interested in processes, so the technicalities of how do we actually design good technology enhanced programs. The inevitable AI came up, and also a bit of post-pandemic impact and technologies. So we're looking forward to telling us about that. And also just a bit of staff development. So how do we sell this to our colleagues and to other staff? And how do we increase engagement with digital tools? So I think I'll stop there.
Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to kind of introduce our first speaker, and that's Nathan Page from University of York. He's an ed advisor like me at the university, but he looks after the online programs. So he's got a background in English language teaching and lecturing in applied linguistics. And he's now focused on helping our colleagues to develop their online programs, including the MBA. So Nathan, over to you.
Okay, thanks Lillian. Thanks everyone, and thanks for the invite from the organisers and for having me along. So showing my screen now, I'll just pop it into slideshow view. Hopefully everyone can see that. Okay. So then, is that okay? So you've got me for about 12 minutes on, I've called this session Reflections on Developing Design and Tutoring Practice for Online Learning. So as Lillian said, I'm an ed advisor, so I have a kind of broad remit at the university to enhance the online programs. And, you know, the way I think about this is the design aspects, what's actually built there, what's actually on the sites, learning sites and so on, and then what's the tutoring that's going on top of that. And of course, I mean, this session's called Designing for Technology Enhanced Programs. I suppose my argument is, yes, we can talk about the design and everything, but it's the tutoring aspects. I mean, that's really what my reflections have led me to believe, and I've tried to, you know, get that across in my session. So let me move on a little bit. In context, so these are fully online master's degrees. I do think that's really important because obviously I'm going to be making quite a strong argument that tutoring is vital, but you know, there are other kinds of online learning. There are self-directed learning and so on, but if it's a master's degree, clearly there are cohorts and tutoring, so that is a key aspect. We have developed these with an external partner, which may be of interest in terms of the context. We do run an interesting term structure. There are 6 short terms per year, They're 8 weeks long each and they run back to back. So that has an impact on what we do at a design level, certainly, and at a tutoring level. There is a theoretical underpinning. I would suggest that is ABC Learning Design for the design and Community of Inquiry for the tutoring. Now, I'm not going to attempt to overview the models. I think a lot of the people here will know them already. However, I have got a slide at the end with resources, and if anyone doesn't know what they are, want to catch up, the things I've linked should be quite useful ways into those. And also we use Canvas as the LMS, which obviously does affect what we do quite a lot as well. Hopefully that's all clear so far. Now, let me talk a little bit then about how I've tried to enhance learning design. So I've called this, areas of learning design development, areas that I've tried to develop and refine. Now, point one here, the new build and redevelopment process and the practice around it, that is really key, because obviously we have a method of getting modules and programs built from zero, from ideas in people's heads to program documents to actually building the thing online. And I do think it's absolutely vital to have one clearly defined. There have been times during the 4.5 years I've done this role when things really felt like they were going off track. So that at that point, I just paused and literally mapped it all out chronologically, who does what, in what order, in what sequence to get the things done. I do think that's kind of important. Of course, we have to be flexible. Of course, it can be contextual based on who you're working with and the timescales they've got. However, having a process is vital. And that, I would say, for redevelopment, it's not necessarily exactly the same process. So I think that also has to be mapped and understood, and that's a key thing that I've worked on, I think. So points 2, 3, and 4 on this slide, they kind of feed into what I've already said, but let me go through them. They're a bit more detail in terms of what I do. So point 2, it's been vital to understand our context and learners and adjust the design practice over time. What I mean by that is clearly we've got a theoretical underpinning, ABC, and we apply it and we make the modules in light of that. However, we've got our own context, program context, own learners. So over time, through student feedback, through tutor reflections, through sort of pooling knowledge, we've understood more about what will work in this space for our learners and our programs. So just a couple of examples, discussions and collaborations, which are obviously two of the things which Laurillard says are, ABC building blocks. We initially had too many, definitely had too many of them. Over time, it's become a sort of less is more thing. We'd rather have less of those, but very targeted, very aligned, rather than too many, and that just creates fatigue and so on. And the formative feedback, the style of it, the timing, how it's done, that's definitely evolved over time. We've learned more about what works over time. Point 3, I'm going to break out of my slides to show a couple of things in a minute, but point 3 is around the methods in which we scaffold the content developers. So we do make extensive use of templates. We provide a template when a new module is being built. And it is actually really important, I think, because obviously some things have to be consistent. We don't want everything to be too samey and too repetitive. However, some vital things have to be templated. And the templates then, if you set them up in the right way, I think they can allow a content developer to be innovative within the template. And I'll show a bit about what I mean in a minute. And yeah, other resources to support the use of the template, for example, how to edit in Canvas, which is very user-friendly for the content developers. We want them to feel supported in terms of how to edit. They can always come to us if they need help, but they also need that, they need to be enabled to actually edit in Canvas. Otherwise, they'll be disengaged from the tool. They need to be able to work with it to refine and iterate, we think. And then obviously 3B, I mean, feedback on builds is something I do. I support the content developer from a learning design point of view. I give lots of feedback as they go. Half time, not too bad. I think I'm about halfway. And I've done whole learning design courses on, good practice in design. And point 4, accessibility work. These days, obviously, it really underpins everything we do. So there's a thread right through all the support, and there's a kind of guide which underpins it all and is constantly referred to in the guidance. So I'll just come out of slides just to show a few things quite quickly, given that I've just heard that bell. Basically, our template, it looks like this. They have all these pages in Canvas. Some of them are, like I said, the infrastructure is pre-built. Some of them have to be edited to whatever the module is, but some of them stay the same. And then you get into these sort of templates here. So if someone wants to do a reading activity or a lecture, they work with a template, and they can be, they can adapt it. But basically what they get on that page, it gives all these prompts, make sure the learning's connected. There's accessibility features like the header, it's made more active because there's a template there for setting questions. There's a load of guidance, technical guidance here, how to find the right template for the slides, the length, and so on. So that they receive all this and they work with it and they get more support as needed. I'll just give an example of what a finished one looks like. It's quite brief in terms of its linking text and so on, but you get the idea. Someone works with this, and then it has that structure. It has accessibility features built in, and it has active learning built in, and so on. And that's a big part of what's been done. I think just briefly the accessibility checklist, I think that's definitely worth a mention. So, I've developed this over time, and a content developer or editor should feel they can refer to this. Let's say they're putting in images, they can go to the images area, and there are some principles here and a rationale of why they're there. And it's about alt text, length of alt text, and quality of images, captioning, all that kind of accessibility related stuff, really. So without further ado, I should whiz back into my slides just to talk a bit about tutoring practice and what we've done with that. So in tandem with what I've worked on with the design enhancement, the tutoring enhancement has been point one. That's a standalone resource which a colleague and myself made in Canvas. They can click through it and learn in a self-study fashion about tutoring practice, but making sure that it's always scaffolded through support. Tutors email me to ask for advice. I have meetings with them and so on about how to enhance practice. Again, all built around community of inquiry, really, if anyone's familiar with that. We do try to enable the departments to work out their own best practice and then share amongst themselves, so that it's coming from within the department rather than me as a central member of staff. And lots of training courses, short courses, longer courses, and taking part in department sort of training workshops and so on whenever we can, really. Now, okay, so let me say a bit about why I think the two things have to go hand in hand. So from my point of view, you do have to take that joint view of design and tutoring practice for a few reasons. For example, with the design, you have to be mindful of what role are the tutors supposed to be playing in the learning. If you set an activity that is purely for self-study and the tutor's having no impact in that area, fine. But clearly there's going to be waypoints when the tutor does have to do something, give feedback, for example, or facilitate a group discussion. Now that really has to be clear at the design level. It has to be written in. So we have to cover the questions that I've put lower down, like how do we actually make that clear in the text and so on. But then if you do all that design stuff, all that good stuff, the tutoring side, you absolutely need the tutor to understand what those actions are. If there's somehow a disconnect, like if a different person takes it on and tutors it and they don't understand the initial design, that's a major problem. So I do think, we need the training, but we also need the joined up idea of design and tutoring as hand in hand. And then obviously they loop back onto each other. So if you get feedback on the tutoring practice, it impacts design and vice versa. So, a fairly simple point, but it is worth labouring. And I have got, it's a bit of fun really, but when I thought of a way to sort of give a hook on why do they go together or how can we remember this, I thought of Holmes and Watson. I don't know if this works for anyone else. It works for me. I just any inseparable duo from popular culture could work. Basically, for me, that's a 1 minute bell. That's okay. Basically, the reason it works at a bit deeper level is Holmes is supposed to be very technical, very rational, very considered and measured. Watson's supposed to be humanitarian. He cares about emotions. He cares about feelings. So for me, obviously, one represents design and one represents tutoring, and that's just something that works for me. It may or may not work for you. So just, to start summing up, a few testimonials, some feedback from students. The access to materials was really easy throughout the programme. No issues at all. Great content, well structured, very enjoyable learning experience. I mean, possibly some of the templating work and enhancement work has scaffolded that. A tutor comment there about one of my courses in tutoring, just saying that they'll be, more mindful of discussion boards and how to spark, engage, and so on. And just the resources I mentioned earlier, I think I've mentioned them all, except for some of my blog posts, which overlap, what I've talked about today. And that's it, really. So thanks for listening. And I was prompted to think of a provocative question to pose to the audience. I haven't got one properly well made, but it's obviously I'm interested if anyone's got any comments or questions around what they do around design and tutoring and the way the two interlink in your own practice. That's whether you support these things or whether you do it, whether you're an active person delivering the tutoring and building the content yourselves. And that's it from me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and well done with the timing, spot on. So what we're going to do, if you've got questions that you want to ask Nathan, pop them in the text chat and Nathan can answer either over the next 20 minutes or so or at the end in the discussion session. I'm going to move straight on now to introduce Julie Vos, Head of Digital Education and the Department Deputy Director of the Learning Enhancement and Development Unit at City University, where she's been doing some really good work on kind of highlighting the importance of accessibility with her colleagues there. And Julie's going to speak to us about the UCISA survey, the Technology Enhanced Learning Surveys, and how that has influenced her approach within her context with her colleagues. So, Julie, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Alistair. So yeah, I'm Head of Digital Education at City University of London, but I'm also a member of the UCISA Digital Education Group. So you'll get both aspects here today. Okay, so just a little bit about UCISA for those of you who haven't come across them before. So it's the Universities and Colleges Information Systems Association. It's a member-led professional body, and I'm one of the members of one of the special interest groups, so digital education group. There's a range of special interest groups, primarily more on the IT side, but we work most closely in our group with the digital capabilities group. So that might be of relevance to people here today. So range of things that UCISA provide, events, conferences, we run surveys, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today, as well as toolkits and best practice guides. So if you haven't come across them before, there'll be some links in the presentation. You can go and find out more. So the UCISA Technology Enhanced Learning, or TEL survey, has been running since 2001, and there's a range of reports and case studies available for you to have a look at if you're interested. But what I'm going to talk to you today is the changes that we've seen since the 2020 survey, which was conducted just as the UK was going into sort of lockdown for the pandemic, and then look at the findings from our 2022 Pulse survey. So we wanted to do a sort of check-in with people to see how they were doing. The surveys typically run every 2 years, but we are in the process of reviewing the survey. So that's why we did a Pulse one, and we're due to do a larger survey again next year. We're working with the Digital Capabilities Group to combine TEL with digital capabilities and accessibility into one sort of big survey. So we tend to get a fairly good response rate. In 2020, we had 62% of UK higher education institutions, and in 2022, it was 50%. We've also supplemented these with some case study webinars with a range of colleagues from across the UK. And we launched the 2022 survey results with a webinar with, again, some colleagues from UK institutions. Just a nod to the survey team, just to, let you know who's involved. So it's primarily from UK higher education, but we also have support from Nick Smith, who's from the Research Partnership. So today we'll just focus on the programme design and delivery aspects of the survey. So in this question, we asked respondents to name 3 developments that's starting to make new demands in terms of support required by users. So this is a general, what's happening in your institution, what's challenging you at the moment. So we found that the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is quite evident in the support demand. So we've seen universities reporting sort of new modes of delivery. That was 27%. So things like blended and online, and 24% specifically noted the challenges of supporting hybrid and high flex teaching. So here we've defined that as a program which enables students to attend live classes either in person or online. Accessibility was also one of the other areas. So people talked about it in terms of having to raise awareness of accessibility requirements, providing support for captioning, and how to create accessible documents. We also asked respondents about the different forms of course delivery, and this is quite a long-standing question that we've had, but we added in high flex or hybrid as a new option this year. So when we think about blended learning, we split that into blended learning with supplementary resources. So just sort of using your VLE with additional materials, maybe admin materials or lecture notes, and then active learning. So looking at where learning is actually taking place through the online learning environment. So blended learning has always been the most prevalent delivery mode across the sector. And we asked institutions, is it extensive across the institution? Is it across some schools or departments, or is it just individual teachers? But primarily blended supplementary learning, 81% are using this across the institution. So we've seen a slight increase since 2020, but it's always been very high. Where we've seen quite a significant increase has been in the active blended learning. So previously it was 20% in 2020 and I think 18% in 2018. So fairly sort of similar, but actually it's shot up to 36% and now doing active blended learning across the institution. And we've seen an increase across schools and departments as well, going from 40% up to 49%. In terms of our case studies, some of the data suggests that this rise in active blended learning, it might be attributed to some of the more planned approaches to the use of technology during the pandemic and moving everyone online. And also the pandemic resulted in greater support for staff in terms of developing blended learning. So one of our case studies, Falmouth reported upskilling every member of staff during the pandemic. So they're much more comfortable with designing a blended learning curriculum now. And also trying to get learning design staff and learning design processes embedded in that programme approval process. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing at City around that. There's also been, as part of the pandemic situation, greater opportunities for sharing practice. And this was noted by a couple of our case study institutions, and the importance of peer support, raising awareness of what colleagues are doing and showcasing some of the active blended learning that's going on in institutions. And also we've looked at some of the assessment side of things. So people are now focusing on more authentic and open assessment as a result of having to move things online. In terms of other types of delivery, so we asked about hybrid or high flex, but this doesn't seem to be that well established across the sector. So only 9% of institutions said this was supported extensively across an institution. The majority of use is at the sort of individual teacher level, so 34%. Some cases it's across schools and departments, so 28%. And I'll talk about City's experiences with that later. In terms of fully online, this has always been sort of fairly low, but it has doubled since 2020. So more institutions are looking to do fully online across the institution, but it's still very low at 9%. The majority of take-up is across schools and departments. And I think we've seen across the sector an increase in the number of jobs related to sort of head of online education and looking at the sort of online delivery that Nathan talked about in the first presentation. And to support these changes in programme delivery, we also track the tools that are in use across institutions. So we continue to see a wide range of tools supported. What we've termed our TEL toolkit has the sort of top 6 tools which are in use in 50% or more of an institution's courses. Thank you. So the VLE, an obvious one there, 96% have this in use in 50% or more of courses. Text matching, so tools like Turnitin, for example, and reading lists, lecture capture. But we saw an increase in content management systems and webinar tools as a result of the pandemic. One thing to note here is that although online assessment suddenly came into the fore, there was very little take-up of digital exams and proctoring software across all courses. So only 10% of institutions who responded are using this in 50% or more of their courses. So it's still fairly small scale across an institution. So what I'm going to do now is just talk about what we've been doing at City to support some of the changes in programme design. So one thing my team have done earlier this year is establish a digital learning design service. We've been working with a couple of programs in our School of Science and Technology to support learning design. It's an area we've always wanted to explore more, and we finally got the opportunity to do that. But we've established a service now, so it's quite clear what is available to staff in terms of the support we can provide. So we're looking at how we can promote that more within the institution. I think there's a bit of a culture dynamic, and I suspect others have the same thing of, you know, we've always been quite reactive as a team. We respond to requests from academics, and we're trying to be a bit more proactive and go, look, we have the expertise in learning design and user experience design. We want to work with you to improve the programs and modules that you're putting together. So yeah, trying to get past that cultural dynamic of staff are very used to just to come along to the training and then they do their own thing, to working in partnership. And I think that's the key to success here. It's working in partnership and drawing on all the resources rather than academics feeling they have to upskill in all these areas alongside everything else that they're doing. To support this, we've been doing a project around module consistency for our VLE. So we've updated the module checklist that we have available to staff, and this just provides guidance on good structure for a Moodle module. But the challenge we've had in the past is the guidance has been out there and staff haven't followed it, or they've haven't had a chance to engage with it. So what we've done is we've worked with 3 or 4 programs to really work with them and develop the templates in conjunction with the staff and do a lot of the work for them, the design and the putting stuff online for them. And I think that's really helped. We're doing the evaluation at the moment. But the initial feedback from staff and students is it's very positive, and the students have really engaged with this more consistent way of accessing their modules. We've also had for a couple of years an inclusive curriculum development framework, so that prompts staff to think about how they can be more inclusive in their teaching in terms of decolonizing their content, in terms of accessibility, and just being more aware of inclusivity. In terms of hybrid learning, we installed quite a number of spaces across the city during the pandemic to respond to the need for having students online and on campus. So we've got 30 specialist spaces available. And these are used, we've got a couple of sort of hybrid programs, so these are agreed as hybrid, and then we have some hybrid modules as well. So we run workshops on hybrid learning, and we also provide a team of co-pilots who work with the staff to support the in-class sessions. So they're there to provide the management of the chat, to deal with sort of technical issues that students might be having online, and generally support the lecturer. They're not there to help with the teaching, they're there to help with just making sure everything's working smoothly. I think one of the challenges we've got here is some staff have gone, oh, hybrid sounds nice, I'll give that a go. What we would like to see moving forward is getting this embedded into programme approval, so it's agreed that this is a hybrid programme and that staff receive the support and training they need, rather than just thinking they can rock up next week and just do a hybrid session, because this does need to be properly designed. And I think it's just getting that across. The people who are doing it are doing it well because it has been designed into their programmes. But it's not something that we would advocate for anyone just to try. And then finally, thinking about how we support staff through our MA and academic practice. So I know many institutions run a postgraduate certificate. We're lucky that ours goes up to MA level, but we have a couple of modules there which were very useful for staff, especially in the pandemic, around developing digital education and also getting them to think about curriculum design. So we talk about a range of models out there. We do talk about ABC, that's the model that we use at City around our digital learning design, but also some simpler models. So Jeff Petty's Present, Apply, Review is quite a nice one for staff to start getting to grips with the idea of learning design. And we actually had to run an extra version of it was technology enabled academic practice module during the pandemic, because there was such a lot of demand. I think staff liked working with others, and they worked on a project to put something online. So one thing I just wanted to find out from everyone here is what support is available for your academics or teaching staff in terms of program design. Do you have learning design support? Do you run anything on your MA or PG Cert modules? What workshops do you run? So if you could pop in the chat, it'd just be nice to sort of find out what others are doing. And then just some final links. So if you want to look at the survey results, they're all on the UCISA website. My colleague Richard Walker and I wrote a publication around the post-pandemic learning technology developments, and then there's brighter ways to get in contact.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Julie. Well, I'll give people a couple of moments to respond to your question, because I think that wasn't a throwaway at the end, was it? You genuinely want to see what
Yep.
other people are doing. So we will give, if you want to sort of take a moment or two, just to respond to Julie's question. Do you want to put that question back up there, or do you want to voice it again for us, or I'll pop it in the chat if you say so.
Yep.
It was.
So what support is available for academics or teaching staff in your institution in terms of programme design? I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, that's great.
I can see a question about our service definition. So I'll put in a link to our learning design service so you can see the information there.
Great. So we got some good responses coming in, which we'll pick up later when we do the discussion session. But I'll just give people a moment or two so that when Sheila starts, people are paying attention to Sheila rather than still trying to write things in the chat. So another minute or so. I particularly liked that concept of the learning design being part of the course approval process. And once learning design and accessibility and inclusion and so on are embedded in those quality assurance processes, then you know an organisation is going to be moving forward strategically, not depending on specific people's specific passions. So I thought that was great. Okay, so I'm going to kind of work on the basis that most people who have something to say about the support that's available in their institution have put it in, and if you haven't put anything in, it might be reflecting the fact that you're not sure. Maybe that's not a question that you'd be able to answer, or maybe you know that there isn't very much there. But I'm going to pass over to Teresa now, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Alistair. And I have to say, as usual, we're providing a webinar with some lots and lots of concentrated information. So please get familiar with that Xerte resource and come back, because the people who are speaking today have lots and lots of additional resources for you to explore. Sheila and I first met on the platform previously known as Twitter many, many years ago. And in fact, on our first, I don't know whether Sheila remembers this, but the first time I saw her in the flesh, I'd recognized her from a Shoe tweet as I walked into an open educational resources conference in Cardiff. And I thought, I know that person. I've spoken to them on Twitter. Sheila is one of my go-to thought leaders. She's also very kindly joined our newly established LinkedIn group, Future Teacher 3.0. We do have our concerns about Twitter, X, and we have set up a new group now open to all of you. I hope you'll join us, and you can find Sheila there. She's an experienced independent academic, digital learning and teaching developer, a commentator, a fabulous keynote speaker. I know we're going to continue this marvelous set of resources today by listening to her, and you'll also find on her LinkedIn profile a direct link into her blog, How Sheila Sees IT, which I totally recommend. She's also a very talented artist. So over to you, Sheila.
Thanks, Teresa. I'll just try and stop blushing now and hopefully live up to that expectation. I do remember meeting you for the first time in person, Teresa, but I just have to say, while my slides go into presentation mode, since the pandemic, I'm working at home. My shoe collection is lying in the wardrobe, very dusty, because I just seem to wear slippers and trainers now, and the odd, maybe sometimes welly boots. But anyway, let's get on to what I'm talking about today. Thank you for the invitation to come and speak with you today. I'm delighted to be able to share this work that I have been doing with my friend and fellow consultant Helen Beetham, who I'm sure you'll all be aware of. We've been working with Sarah Knight in JISC and Elizabeth Newell. So we've been doing some work probably for about the last 2 years. About a year ago, I think it was at last year's Alt conference, we published the results of a survey that we did in the UK, across UK higher education, on approaches to curriculum and learning design. And we really just wanted to find out what, if any, impact the lockdowns had on current and future practice around curriculum and learning design. And that report was published last year. And actually, I know in the chat there was some mention of ABC. One of the questions we asked was specifically about models, and ABC, I think about over 40% of the respondents said that they were using ABC in some shape or form. So we made some recommendations from that report, and over the last sort of 8 months, we've been working on phase 2. And actually at this year's ALT conference, I've actually got a paper copy of this just now. Our report Beyond Blended came out, and we've been developing this with the community. We've been sharing some draft resources, workshops and conferences over the past year, and we have an advisory group that we've been working with as well. So just to give you a little bit of background, one of the things that Helen and I found quite strange when we started doing this work was actually finding definitions of curriculum and learning design. We didn't really find any that we thought were actually up to the job, shall we say. So I'm not sure this, but I think this is the definition, the definitions that we came up with. So when we're talking about curriculum review design, it tends to be that higher level kind of planning and things that go into QA when you're working with professional bodies, etc. And the learning design tends to be how learning is going to be supported at that module and activity level. But crucially, quite often these terms are used interchangeably. So when we're talking about it in our context, in our work, we're talking about all the processes around planning and designing a course of study and how students are going to learn. So just to give a bit of background, some of the things that came through from our survey and that we noticed from our community engagement, in terms of kind of that post-pandemic, I'm calling it kind of a push, because a lot of these things were happening, but the pandemic certainly pushed things along, so things got accelerated very quickly. And I think that was reflected in some of the stats that Julie shared with us as well. So people were thinking about different modes of participation. Of course, one of the things that came out very strongly in our research was that people were thinking far more at program level design and taking a more holistic view, not just thinking about everybody's individual module. Obviously, people were thinking far more about online learning environments. Lecture recordings became ubiquitous. People were thinking and using collaborative tools much more, and thinking about online and blended pedagogies, and thinking about how time and space were shifting, and thinking about different modes of participation, and of course, different types of assessment which were forced by lockdown. Open book, etc. In terms of what we're thinking about just now, in terms of that pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, we really find that people are actually really thinking about space and place in different ways. People are thinking about streaming, and actually students can now, I suppose, control how they're using how they use space and place, and how resources can expand and contract time. I've just put a little screenshot on there of the kind of how that relates to organizational transformation, because some of you might know that just published their GIST digital transformation toolkit. The work that we do kind of fits in that knowledge development area. But anyway, if you're thinking kind of about wholesale digital transformation, which I know people are always thinking about that, there's some really quite nice resources within that toolkit as well, but thinking about more holistically and organizationally as well. So kind of again, it was quite interesting coming after Julie and the things that were coming out in her from the UCISA survey. One of the things that Helen and I have found from the work that we've been doing is that we think that practically all learning has some form of blend in it now. And I think that, Julie, that was a really nice kind of breakdown you gave that of that kind of active blended learning as well. We're all using a much more diverse range of spaces and places and collaborative environments. And as I was saying, you know, digital resources can expand and compress time and reconfigure time. Learners can connect learning times and spaces and digital medias. I think they're probably doing it more, and we're understanding how they're doing it more. I'm not saying that they didn't do it before the pandemic, but I think we're just far more aware of what's happening now. And of course, learners can participate and set up their own groups and interactions. And I think I'll expand on a bit more is learners can be in transit as well as being in transition. So they can be on the bus transit, but they can be transitioning through different spaces as well. And with all that, we have the possibility of new learning pathways. And again, saying program design seemed to be quite a strong focus for a lot of people, as well as designing new media resources and activities. So in terms of what we're talking about and what we've called beyond blended, we've broken down what we think the ingredients of beyond blended are to us. So place, as I kind of alluded to, is very important. So when you're in place, you're either in place or online. And what we wanted to do was maybe try and break down some of the binaries around about how we think about place, because even if you're online, you are physically somewhere as well. So time and space. So I think we're all quite happy and comfortable with the notion of synchronous and asynchronous learning just now. But you can be in place doing something asynchronously and online as well. So we need to think about the media that we're using, the recorded lectures, the interactive activities, collaboration, etc. And think about the different kind of groups and roles and where people are and how they can interact with them as well. So that's what we think are the main ingredients of beyond blended. In terms of participation, we see kind of 4 main modes of participating online. So you can be live online, or you can be live in place. You can be asynchronous online, and you can be asynchronous on place. And in the diagram there, we've put some example activities that could be happening in these 4 modes of participation. But these can be blended as well. So in terms of what's in design, I think what we're thinking, there is kind of that focus on space and time. And one of the things we haven't really talked about quite deliberately, we haven't used the words hybrid or high flex, because they're quite contextual, we think. And certainly what came out of our phase 1 work was that people were talking about hybrid and high flex, but they weren't quite sure what they meant in their context, even though university might have wanted to move there. They weren't quite sure what that meant. And also some of the challenges around using these spaces, because teaching in a hybrid space does challenge us cognitively as well. It's a very different way of teaching. So how we manage that and how we actively manage pace and presence. One of the things, again, that's come through not only in our work, but in practice everybody's work, in terms of the impact on students of the pandemic, is that students demand a bit more flexibility now. So how do we do that? How do we give choice with the limited resources that we have? Because the more flexible you are in your program module design, then the more resource that it's probably going to take up, and resource staff usually are quite limited. So that is a finite resource. So how do we manage that kind of trade-off between choice and flexibility? And how do we think more about the different modes and blends for different activities and interactions? And I'll put a link to where you can download the report into the chat. But actually in the report, we have got some sample activities and just some of the types of activities you could do in different modes of participation as well. And that's some of the resources that we're developing further. So we'll have more resources that people can use and integrate into their existing design practice as well. So I won't go through that too much. But one of the things, I suppose, one of the main kind of visuals we've got from this work, and sort of to summarize some of our work, is we have what we're calling our 6 pillars of beyond blended design. So we have, excuse me, place, platform, and pace, blend, flex, and support. So place, so little straplines for everyone, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. Learners and educators are always physically somewhere. So although we're all co-located online, and we're all online, we're all physically somewhere else as well. And I think that's something that it seems so simple, but quite often we forget about it. We think if people are joining us online that they're floating around in the cloud, and they're not. They're always somewhere physical. And there might be different contexts that we have to think about. And I think in the pandemic, that became it became very apparent, the challenges that some people had working in different places or in limited places. Platforms, so just to follow that out, learners and educators, as well as being physically somewhere, we can always be virtually somewhere else. as we are. And you might all be here, but actually in another virtual space just now, checking your email, on WhatsApp, wherever. You might be in lots of different virtual places as well. As I've alluded to before, pace, learners are experiencing time pace differently now with synchronous and asynchronous activities, and whether they're being more responsive or being more reflective. So we have the recorded lecture, but there's kind of phenomenon of watch parties that developed over the pandemic. So we always knew that students were speeding up, speed listening and speed watching lecture in the before times, before the pandemic. But now I think students are watching things together, they're collaborating around that resource. Oh, and okay, you've got a minute left, but that should be okay. Blend, as I've alluded to before, what we think now is most learning has some element of in place and online activity, synchronous and asynchronous elements. There may be some circumstances where that's not true. I know I've talked to some FE colleges and they were a bit iffy about that one, but we think generally that there is a blend now. Flexibility. Learners and educators do expect some flexibility in their modes of learning and where and when they have to participate. And as I said before, that can be quite challenging. I think for many of us, from that kind of educator point of view, we might maybe like a bit more flexibility, but there might be things happening in our context that actually is reducing that flexibility as well. But certainly that's something we need to think about just now. And of course, as we brought up before, support is really, really important. Continued support. There was a lot of support, as Julie and Nathan have exemplified, not just through the pandemic, but available just now. But learners and educators need to be continually supported so they can understand different modes of participation and what's needed to engage students effectively as we go forward. And that's me finished. So there's the link to download the report if you would like. And we are developing some web resources which will be available in the coming months. But if you want to know about them, you can sign up from that link as well. My question for you is, what is your blend if you're doing blended learning? And if you are using different modes of participation, how do you make that explicit to your students so they really understand how and where they're engaging? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sheila, and well done on the timing as well. That's great. We've had 3 really good sessions and they've all kept to time, which is brilliant. And unusually in some ways for Future Teacher, you've got loads of homework to do. I've been looking at the various further links and references people have been giving, and there's some brilliant reports to read, documents to explore, some examples from different institutions. So we're now into the session where it's we're discussing and responding to what people have put in the chat. Now you may, as a presenter, you might be already responding to some of the questions that have been asked to your session. Feel free to do that, or feel free to look at the chat and open the microphone and tell us rather than responding via the text. It's entirely up to you. So we've got the 3 presenters here, and you've got your Future Teacher friends also able to comment, and you're welcome as individuals to open up the chat if you like. And the chat, just to let you know, what we'll do is stop a couple of minutes before 2 o'clock just for Ron to give a summary and get you to consider your one thing from the session, and then we normally will hang on for a few minutes afterwards if anybody else wants to carry on the conversation. So that's the overview, and Lillian will be disappearing shortly. Lillian, is there anything, because you're going to disappear shortly, anything that you want to say?
I think generally this format of asking our speakers to prompt all of us to think about things has been wonderful. I think it's really led to a rich amount of questions in the chat, but also responses in the chat, which is useful for all of us to kind of get a sense of what we're all facing or participating in. So that's my key comment. I'm looking forward to catching up with the chat after the session as well.
And are there any specific questions that either Rosemary, Teresa, or Ron spotted in the chat that haven't yet been answered that we want to pick out? or maybe they've been partly answered and we want to explore them further. Just trying to find my own chat. Where's it gone?
Oh, I can, while you're looking for that, there was just this one about, do we specify the blend, how much time to spend online, how much time to spend in the face-to-face? Do we really tell our students, we think it will take you a couple of hours to prepare for your seminar, or do we just throw all these readings and recordings at them and let them figure it out? So I think that's an interesting question. I wonder if people in the audience either want to pipe up or type in the chat.
I'm happy to kind of respond to that, Lillian, as well, in terms of what we're doing. And I'm sure maybe Julie and Nathan would as well. We haven't specifically done that because we feel that that's actually a contextual thing. It depends on your organization. I know some people have already gone sort of 80-40, 60, 80-20, 60-40. Also, I think what's perhaps more important than the time is actually to think about the activity that you're engaging and where you want your students to be. And I think it's explaining, I think that perhaps what needs to be a bit more explicit, and having those discussions about, okay, we are going to do this activity online. Why are we doing it online? Where do we expect you to be online? What platform are we using? So I think it's kind of going into those kind of smaller design discussions, and then when you have your design, you can sort of maybe see for your module or your program how much time is online, how much time is in place. And I think what we possibly need to be better at is explaining that to students. And I know that a lot of people are having issues around engagement with students, so they might be on campus but they're not actually coming into the rooms, the places that maybe we want them to be. So actually being more explicit about the value of doing an activity in a certain place at a certain time for a certain time length. I think we need to do that. So that's one of the reasons that we have not put any times in that, because it's contextual. And I think it's something that we need to, as a sector, kind of work at sharing practice, or at developing practice around that.
I'd like to pick up a question. Mike Walters asked some great questions in the chat, and I'm sure people will be looking at those, and I have seen some responses. But this follows on really from what Sheila was saying. How do you ration or prioritize support? We've talked about limited tutor time or limited design time, the various limits and limitations that we all face. So yeah, I think his question is probably on everybody's mind. How do you prioritize?
Just on that, when we first had a learning design team, they had a plan for each faculty to have so many hours, and then we joined FutureLearn, and all the design team work went on FutureLearn.
Thanks, Mike. That's
how are other people managing that then?
Yeah.
I'm happy to respond. So for our piece of work around sort of Moodle module consistency, what we did was we looked at where like the NSS may be low, or where there are a lot of student complaints around consistency. We also tried to target some of the bigger programs so that it has a greater impact. So I mean that, we can't work with every program. I think our institution would love us to, but we can't work in the way that we would like to work with them. We've got a checklist, staff can use it if they want to, but and they're encouraged and supported to do so. But as I said earlier, I think you need to work more closely with staff and work in partnership with them to have the impact that we would like to have. So that's how we targeted particular programs. It was saying, look, there may be an NSS score here that we could help improve. We know you've got a large program, so some of our programs have got up to 600 students on, so that's quite a lot of impact in terms of reaching a greater amount of students. So I think that's one way of looking at how you ration out the resource. Yes, it would be nice to be able to sort of offer it out to everyone, but I think you have to do it in a strategic way.
I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in how that will also perhaps how that might work backwards down the sort of down the chain. I know when I talk about accessibility with organizations, I often say, look, this is something that you're going to have to do as a tutor, a lecturer. You will need to be aware of digital accessibility. So why not have it somewhere in the job description as a desirable, if not requirement? Do you think that because of this shift, this post-pandemic shift, that we might be in a situation where actually we need to expect some level of learning design ability and skill, and that might start appearing in job descriptions as desirables? Is that too radical, or is that unrealistic?
I think that'd be nice. I think, but we need to understand, you know, what is the role of the academic here? And I think, as I said earlier, people are putting more and more stuff onto the academic, and actually we have expertise. We should be working in partnership and not necessarily expecting them to suddenly become learning designers and user experience experts and accessibility experts and digital literacy experts. It's about bringing together all those people who work in a team. So yes, they probably need a basic understanding, and I would love to see, you know, a basic understanding of accessibility and of digital capabilities and all the things that we're trying to embed through graduate attributes in those academic job descriptions. But it's about how can we upskill them a little bit at a time, but still work in partnership. At least so we're talking the same language. I think, you know, a lot of this comes down to, you know, we often don't talk the same language as the academic, and it's how do we translate what we're trying to achieve with learning design into what they're trying to achieve with their own pedagogy.
Yeah.
Many thanks, Nathan. Thanks for everything you've shared. And sorry, you have to go off to, you know, life just goes on, doesn't it? You go off to the next meeting. So look out for your badge, your future teacher badge, which will come to all our presenters following this session. And I'm just going to pop in the chat that LinkedIn group. We've only just set it up. Future Teacher has been going for a long time, but our LinkedIn group has just arrived. Please do come and join us. We'll be able to share lengthier posts through that LinkedIn group as well.
So there was a reference to something I hadn't heard, a model I hadn't heard of before, a concierge model. I know there was a little bit of to and fro about that. Was that from Jorge? Do you want to say anything about that? This was a model, I think Jorge, if I got it right, was suggesting.
Loving that pronunciation, Alistair.
Well, I'm hoping it's right.
Hey, it's perfect.
And maybe he's not actually on the.
He might just pronounce himself as George, for all we know.
Yeah, sorry if I got that wrong. Oh, he may have gone anyway. Anybody else familiar with that? It was interesting, notable that there were many ABC model references. I would be interested, perhaps in the chat pane, if people are using the UDL, Universal Design for Learning framework, in their learning design, because that could be compatible with a range of different approaches, but it's one that ticks off lots of different elements in one go in terms of inclusion, accessibility, etc. So in terms of a yes or a no or a little bit, in the chat pane, can we have some responses if you are using Universal Design for Learning or any model that we might not have heard of other than ABC, because we've heard quite a lot about that.
Alistair, just to follow up on that, the survey we did last year, I alluded to in my presentation, UDL did come up, and one of the things that we found was, although over 40, I think it's 43% of people said they were using ABC, most people were saying they were using it in conjunction with other models and frameworks as well. So people were using ABC and UDL. So I think what we have now, when we have a team of learning designers, they're actually very experienced professionals who know how to mix and match bits out of different models that works for their context. So I think that was a really positive thing that came out of that work as well, that, you know, I think people realize that whilst, you know, all models are good in their own way, there's a little bit of jiggling that we all need to do in terms of our own context and to bring things in that aren't maybe as explicit as they could be. So I think that's a nice thing, and UDL did come up, you know.
That's great, and I can see in the chat as well quite a lot there. Now I'm just going to stop for a minute to give Ron a chance to say his final. Sorry, Ron. Where did the time go?
Yeah, that time has gone. I've been putting the links and things in the text chat, but a reminder to everybody that we do have future sessions, and if you are interested in being a guest speaker like our excellent guest speakers today at one of those future sessions, then there's links in the page to fill in our form, our registration form for expression of interest in being a guest speaker. And as we've just been kind of hearing about, learning design is a key aspect of program design, and that's going to be the focus of our next session. And before you do leave, I've put it in the text chat, but please do share one action, one thing you will do as a result of what you've seen and heard today.
We've already got Chiara talking
Chiara
about
on it already.
her homework. Yeah.
Shall we stop the recording? And
Yeah,
then...
let's stop the recording, and then if people can pop the one thing they'll take away, pop that in there.